So many things affecting them worldwide. Gas prices are always fluctuating, so it's not surprising to hear they'll be going up. But right now, Connecticut lawmakers are debating legislation that could have all of us paying a little more at the pump, regardless of which way prices are trending across the globe. Joining me now is Representative Stephen Harding. He's a Republican from Brookfield, also a ranking member of the Environmental Committee. Mr. Harding, thanks for joining us on Face the Facts.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So the Regional Transportation Climate Initiative, I believe it's 13 states in New England and the Mid-Atlantic, D.C. as well, banding together to try to cut carbon emissions over the next decade. A key component of that bill is what you say amounts to a gas tax. How does that work in your opinion?
So you're exactly right, and I'm calling it a gas tax, and I think many individuals at the end of the day see it as exactly that, because that's truly what it is. It's going to be impacting the bottom line for consumers at the pump. And generally how it works is ultimately the fee or the amount of money or revenue that the state of Connecticut gets is seen at the wholesale level. However, like anything else seen at the wholesale level, it goes right down to the consumer. And so even the largest proponents of this bill, the Department of Environmental Protection here in Connecticut, say that at a minimum, it's going to cost consumers about 5 cents per gallon in the first year that this is implemented, as much as 9 cents per gallon in the first year. And then in subsequent years, it can go up to as high as 26 cents per gallon on the consumers. And so no matter how you look at it, in my opinion, this is absolutely a tax on the consumers in the state of Connecticut.
Now, the governor's pushed back against those higher numbers, but we'll hold his feet to the fire on that when we get him on the show. Supporters say that it's a small cost, it's worth it when it comes to the overall benefits. But again, you just said that small cost could get a lot bigger. Should there be a cap on it, or will there be a cap on it?
So ultimately, there is a cap on it. There's a system in place in which it's supposed to be capped, where essentially there's supposed to be a reserve set aside to offset some of these costs to keep it at a cap. But ultimately, there's no level of guarantees. That's what it's intended to have, a cap. But that's part of the problem as well, is that there's questions surrounding how effective that cap might be. And so essentially the cap is supposed to be at 26 cents per gallon, which is, I think all of us think is a very hefty price to pay per gallon for the consumers of the state. But there's questions surrounding how effective that cap may be as well.
There is no doubt that we have always paid some of the highest prices in the country when it comes to a gallon of gasoline. Were you surprised, though, when British Petroleum came out with a statement supporting this initiative?
Yeah, I was surprised, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're cornering now the electric market. And they're looking to potentially take advantage of investing in that market, which I think is a good thing. And they may see this as a way to begin investing in that new market. It's hard to say exactly what their reasoning is behind supporting it, but ultimately what it comes down to for me is representing my constituents and having them pay potentially a 26-cent tax per gallon is something that I'm not willing to accept, and I think a lot of legislators feel the same exact way.
And obviously taxes continue to mount here in Connecticut, whether it's housing or it's gas or other things too. So in the early estimates, when they're selling this plan, the TCI is estimated to bring in almost $90 million when it comes to annual revenue. How much of that do you believe could be back invested in transportation? Because we have a history here in Connecticut of dipping into the transportation fund and using that money for other things.
Well, interestingly enough, it's a great question, but interestingly enough, none of these funds, I believe, are intended to go to the Special Transportation Fund, which, as you well know, is near bankruptcy. And so these funds, although many of them are noble causes and some of them do involve transportation needs, none of the funds, to my understanding, are supposed to go into the Special Transportation Fund at all. And one would argue that if we're going to be increasing gas taxes, it would behoove us to put funding in the Special Transportation Fund, which is in such desperate need of funding at this time.
Now, despite the no votes from you and your Republican colleagues, maybe that's a change you could make in that bill once it gets out of committee, or are you going to try to make changes to the legislation as it moves through the House?
I'm always willing, and I think my colleagues are always willing to make changes and make bills better. Again, but ultimately what it boils down to for me, and I think what it boils down to for many of my colleagues, is when you're talking about a 26-cent tax potentially per gallon for our constituents, I don't know if it's ever going to get written to any sort of language that I could ever support something like that.
26 cents seems like an awful lot, and when you hear the governor and the people supporting the initiative, when they say 5 to 9 cents, there's a huge gulf in between those two prices. Is that over a 3-year period, would you say, if it ends up going to that higher number?
It's hard to say exactly when, because there's market variables that ultimately will determine what that price will be to the consumer. But yes, I mean, generally, I think the projections from those that are proponents of the TCI program have it going as high as 26 cents, I believe, in the 3rd year. That is their own projections. I believe the minimum would be around 17%, but that's the minimum. As I said, it can go as high as 26 cents, according to their own projections.
Representative Stephen Harding, Republican from Brookfield, thanks so much for joining us and explaining your position on the issue. I hope you stay healthy.
Same to you. Thank you so much for having me.